I made a video entitled, A Game Developer's Open Letter to Anita Sarkeesian. At the time, I hoped that Ms. Sarkeesian was sincere in her expressed love for video games, and that she was genuinely hoping to spark a discussion about the portrayal of women in them. As a lifelong gamer and developer with a couple decades of professional experience, I offered to engage with her in a respectful dialogue regarding any of the topics she had raised in her Tropes vs. Women series. I noted that she had since clarified her position regarding video games when she said in a published article that it's never been about video games, it's always about social justice. I could continue in this vein, providing countless examples of how the social justice process of utilizing demographic outputs while ignoring the relevant inputs serves as an impetus to subvert systems away from being genuinely just or fair and towards being unjust social engineering programs. For example, you can also see evidence of this process at work as it relates to a great many social programs, be that from Title IX tribunals to affirmative action quotas. But by now, I'm sure you've already got the idea. Social justice isn't about justice at all. Rather, it's about subverting demographic statistics for the purposes of advancing programs of social engineering.
What is it about Harry Potter that attracts the worst types of people? On one hand, you have liberals in America who like to view everything that goes on in society and politics as if it were a Harry Potter novel. Then you have liberals in Britain who love J.K. Rowling and her transphobia. And now you have someone who's working on the much anticipated new Harry Potter game who is an anti-socialist, anti-feminist gamergator who was also a YouTuber who made videos on lots of this stuff. So what we're going to do in this video is take a look at his channel, take a look at some of his views, point out where he's wrong on a lot of it, but also talk about his underlying ideology throughout a lot of this, because it's problematic. And, you know, I'm not going to cancel him and saying, you know, WB should fire this guy, but I think this guy being in a high position with some of his views is problematic because he's going to be directly supervising people. I assume he's many people's boss in that studio, and some of his views on things like racism and sexism and everything like that is pretty problematic for someone who has such a high position. And I know I'm a little late to this story. I think it came out on Friday, and the anti-SJWs already made loads of videos about this stuff, but none of them actually included any footage from his channel, and they were just reading Kotaku articles and responding to the very scant information that was in the Kotaku articles, whereas I'm actually going to go into his channel because I've watched a lot of his videos. Before we go any further, edgier content on my channel is always demonetized, so if you want to support me monetarily, please check out my Patreon. Thanks so much to everyone who has already done this. At the moment, the benefits are gaining access to the private Discord server, and you'll obviously have your name featured at the end of every video and in the description. I'm working for some other benefits that will come in the future. If you want to join our growing community, please check out the Discord and the subreddit in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, check out @TheCavernacle on Instagram and Twitter. And also u/TommyCahill1995 for my personal Reddit. So with that out the way, let's get into the video. Also like this video and subscribe. And finally, we did it. We got to 25,000 subscribers. I'm so grateful for all of you and the support you've shown me, particularly in 2021. But the people who've been around for the last 2 years or so, I'm really grateful to you. And I promised the new chocolate orange would come. So what I got here is a dark one. I actually haven't seen this around much. I might be the first time I actually saw it. Picked it up. So this represents the new 5,000 subscribers I've recently got. So you're all trapped in there. It's like, you know, a soul stone or the infinity gauntlet. One day, hopefully, I'll have enough for 100k. And then I'll stream myself eating all of them. But there you go. Lovely on top of the pyramid. Nice and red on top of a square of white. So enjoy that for the foreseeable future, and let's hit 30k so we can make it nice and symmetrical throughout the whole thing. Maybe I'll get a different flavour. Also, if you know any other flavours apart from these, please link it in the description because I only know about 3 of them. Also, do they have Terry's chocolate oranges in America? People on stream were saying that you have chocolate oranges. Do you have Terry's chocolate oranges? I want to know. Let me know in the comments. So, enough talk of chocolate orange. Let's get into this guy who is called Troy Levitt. So just to frame this quickly, Pink News reporting, far-right Harry Potter video game designer raged at feminists and social justice warriors on YouTube. Troy Levitt, however you say it, a lead designer on WB Games' forthcoming Harry Potter Hogwarts Legacy game, has been called out for his anti-social justice YouTube channel that attacks feminism and sympathises with the Gamergate movement. The channel has almost 26,000 followers and has had over 2 million views, quite similar in size to me. Videos are dated from 2016 to 2018, but resurfaced online as highlighted by Liam Robinson, a contributor to the Did You Know Gaming YouTube channel. Levitt's channel is clearly linked on his Twitter account, and here's the guy, here's his LinkedIn page. So senior producer at Warner Brothers Avalanche, Salt Lake City, and then senior producer from February 2018 to present, was also a game director at Disney. And now let's have a look at the games he made. So his career started in 1994, so he worked on games like Twisted Metal 2, worked on things like Tak and the Power of Juju and its sequel, Dragon Ball Z Sagas, Tak 3, Chicken Little, Hannah Montana, Meet the Robinsons, Bolt, Toy Story 3, which is a decent game, but he was only a consultant on that, and he was a director on Cars 2, Infinity Lone Ranger, Disney Infinity 2.0 Avengers, Disney Infinity 3.0 Inside Out, and Disney Infinity 3.0 Finding Dory. So this is linked on his Twitter account. So his Twitter account says video game development since 95, gamer since 1978, current development project Hogwarts Legacy. No, I won't tell you about it, opinions on my own. So he's tweeted controversial stuff, I guess, about Gamergate and things like that. So he retweeted Ian Miles Chong, who said, "Not narratives, but actually true. Game journalists in general have no knowledge or expertise of the games they cover. Games journalists talk down to their audience and feed them rhetoric about social change. Games journalism neither pays well nor is sustainable." Troy said, from the sad but likely true category. So clearly agrees with that. Not surprising he supported things like Gamergate. Talking about his work and his YouTube together, he was like, "My contract with WB has already impacted my YouTube output. Now that I'm full-time, it'll be impacted even more, but I won't totally disappear." But he has said that they've been fine with his channel. So this was a funny one. I've seen the term late-stage capitalism thrown around as an epithet lately. Is it supposedly a bad thing? But what does it mean? Someone said, "As I understand it, socialists believe that capitalism is an inherently flawed system whose eventual collapse is inevitable and will pave the way for them to take over. Late-stage capitalism is pushing the idea that the system is rapidly reaching this point." It's not pushing an idea, it's just a description of what is happening in the world. Troy saying, "Thanks, that helps and often fits in the context of how I'm seeing it used. Is there evidence of this impending collapse, or is it just wishful thinking that any day all the Amazon delivery trucks will just spontaneously explode?" I don't know. Maybe the Amazon rainforest being completely destroyed. Maybe that human-made climate change based on capitalism and having its roots back in industrialization is going to make parts of the planet so hot you can't live there anymore. Maybe that's an example. Or maybe things like Disney owning most entertainment, maybe Amazon's growing unstoppable power might be good indicators for you there. But this guy is a proper capitalist. He references Thomas Sowell so many times in his video, and he retweeted him here just recently. "Politically, there are a few ideas more potent than the notion that all your problems are caused by other people and their unfairness to you." So this guy is pretty much armoured skeptic, but a game developer. He rejects systemic racism and he rejects systemic sexism in the US and the West in general. And you can see that apparent in his videos, so we're going to go into them now. Now, he made a video on Venezuela and video games and basically said that social justice basically leads to authoritarian communism. Now, he didn't actually write this video himself. He just read an email apparently from a Venezuelan gamer. I wonder how true that is. But basically, he also shows someone else showing about why Venezuela is poor at the moment. And what his description basically doesn't acknowledge is that Venezuela has had sanctions on it for years. So take a look at this clip quick.
Now, before I dive in, here's just a bit of John Stossel describing just how bad it has gotten in Venezuela to set things up.
Venezuela should be rich. Not long ago, Venezuela was the richest country in Latin America. It still has greater oil reserves than Saudi Arabia. But today, Venezuelans starve. These people are fighting over bags of flour.
No hay alimentos, no hay nada.
And then there's the violence. One Venezuelan is murdered every 20 minutes.
Socialism failed in all these places. We are yet to see one socialist country succeed.
And yet, sadly, they and other countries refuse to learn the lessons of history. Other countries will give socialism a go. useful idiots will sing socialism's praises until the last light goes out.
So pretty clearly anti-socialist, but talking about the Gamergate stuff from earlier, pretty obsessed with Anita Sarkeesian, made multiple videos on it, but I want to talk about the Anita's appropriation one, because I found it pretty funny. This guy isn't that bright when it comes to criticising systems and stuff. So basically, Anita made a video criticising Far Cry 3, basically saying the depiction of Citra in the game plays into a pretty common trope about the exotic savage. And it's not just for native people, it's also for, Japanese women as well. I've recently made a video about this, about how cyberpunk, the genre, perpetuates these, sort of stereotypes a lot. And I made a video about anime perpetuating these stereotypes a lot, and this view of women in particular. So I agree, in essence, with a lot of what Anita is saying. I don't agree with everything she says, but in this context, I do agree with her. So let's take a look at him responding to her criticisms.
Ubisoft's 2012 game Far Cry 3 cast players as Jason Brody, a young white American man vacationing in Bangkok with his brother and their white friends. But their carefree fun comes to an end when a skydiving trip goes wrong and they all end up being kidnapped by evil pirates who, you guessed it, are not white.
All right, so we're only 15 seconds in, and already you've probably picked up on Anita's new twist. She's mentioned being white 3 times, and is strongly insinuating that she's calling out specifically white racism in video games.
Jason escapes and encounters a group of island natives called the Rakyat, who enlist his help to rid their island of the pirates, ushering Jason into his exotic and exciting new role as a tribal warrior and white savior is Citra, a young woman who's viewed among her people as a warrior goddess. Under her guidance, Jason's adventure rapidly becomes an absurd hodgepodge of racist stereotypes about tribal cultures and brown women.
Okay, 30 seconds in, and the ideology that carries through the rest of the video has become pretty clear, hasn't it? Anita is a disciple of the religion of identity politics. Each of us are born under a form of original sin based primarily upon our skin color and sex, and hence, she sees people as existing in a hierarchy that is stratified by race and gender. As I said in my video on Gamergate, I am opposed to this worldview.
Citra's strange mystical powers return later in the game when she blows a glowing dust into Jason's face, triggering another hallucinatory sequence that culminates in the game-ending choice: to save Jason's friends and leave the island, or to do Citra's bidding, to savagely kill his friends and stay on the island with her. If players choose to murder Jason's friends and stay with Citra, a scene plays in which the two of them have sex. Then she stabs him while stating that their child will become the new leader of the tribe. Citra is yet another example of a female character whose sexuality is presented as a motivator and reward for the presumed straight male player. When certain white men falsely view Asian women as inherently more obedient or submissive than women from other cultures and sexually fetishize them as a result of these false notions, those women are being exotified, and their race is falsely depicted as the defining aspect of their character and personality.
Anita goes on to make this same mistake again when she calls out Resident Evil 5, another game that was made by exclusively Japanese developers. And then she does it a third time when she goes after Street Fighter 4. Again, yet another game built and designed entirely in Japan, and then only afterwards localized to Western markets. From the transcript of her video, you can see that Anita makes mention of whiteness 11 times, and always in a negative context as illustrating some form of alleged racism. But she doesn't mention Japan or the Japanese even once. I would be interested, however, how well her argument would go over with her devoted followers if they knew that she is essentially calling out not white people, but rather the Japanese as being racists when she does this.
So this guy's obviously a very fragile white Redditor or something. I don't know why he gets so butthurt about Anita talking about white people so much, but basically he doesn't even really address the point she's making about Japanese people and Japanese women in particular, something I addressed, like I said, in my anime video, and it is a true thing of the Western mindset towards Asian women and the sexualized stereotypes, those things. But he also goes on to say that because Japan have made a lot of these games, it can't be racist, essentially. So Anita points to characters like Sheva in Resident Evil 5. I don't know if I'd necessarily say that's racist. Maybe you could argue it's sexist because of maybe the art style and the sexualized nature of things she's wearing. I don't think it's the best example, But I don't really care about that side. I care about the fact that this guy seemingly thinks Japanese people can't be racist because, you know, they're non-white or something. So this is something else he continually talks about. Basically, any criticism of the video game industry of being racist is undermined by the amount of Asians that work in it. Because as we all know, you can't be Asian and racist. Of course you can. And countries like Japan are very xenophobic. Countries like China are very racist to black people. It might not come from the same history of slavery and stuff that the West have, but I've made videos that a lot of these views of black people in ex-colonial countries is influenced by the Western view of black people. Now, in the same video, he goes on to talk about cultural appropriation and how it's actually pretty funny and pretty fun. And you should never be offended about it, even if you wear a silly costume. Say, I wear a silly costume mocking Native Americans, or mocking some other minority. The joke's on me because I look silly.
I think the idea of cultural appropriation is rather ridiculous. I mean, who is to say when someone is wrongfully appropriating someone else's culture? And even if you're making a joke based upon dressing up in the traditional clothing of another culture, isn't the joke mostly upon you because it is clear that you personally look ridiculous in that getup?
But wait a second. If I'm purposely making their culture look silly, isn't that quite offensive to the people I'm making fun of? Especially if they're a minority who've been treated awfully in American history, and especially since there is a legacy of making fun of these people, painting faces red or painting faces black, doing a minstrel routine. That isn't funny. The joke isn't on you. I'm thinking about the Roger scene in Mad Men. Do you not think that's problematic? But anyway, it's not surprising this guy doesn't believe systemic racism exists. And going back to the point, don't you think it's pretty problematic this guy's a director? Imagine if this guy was your boss and you go on YouTube and watch this stuff. How he generally doesn't believe in a lot of racism or sexism or anything like that. And he's actively, you know, an anti-feminist. And he's propping up the status quo. Again, I don't think he should be cancelled or he can't make video games. I'm just thinking of it as an employee standpoint that I would hate this guy to be my boss because I feel like he wouldn't understand any of my problems. He's also extremely pro-capitalist. Anti-feminism and pro-capitalism and minimizing racism I don't think is a good combination for a guy overseeing a game. It's also very funny that it's Harry Potter, this brand that promotes itself as being very inclusive, and this guy's, you know, one of the lead producers on their new game. So here's another funny video. I actually laughed at this. This guy sometimes is so on the nose with the stuff we meme about in terms of how fragile white gamers are. He made a video talking about how it's okay to be a gamer. And again, I was laughing the whole way through this because basically it's like he was framing it like gamers are oppressed. He's basically saying that the media have made gamers as a title into a negative thing associated with white racist men who just play video games. So have a look at the video.
So here are 3 examples of the common anti-gamer media narratives that I am looking to counteract. Narrative number 1. Gamers are misogynists or racist. In their zeal for promoting identity politics, some poorly informed media pundits have tried to recast the label of gamer into being a sort of umbrella term exclusively targeting white males. From the inception of Gamergate in August of 2014, right up until the present day in November of 2017, the common media narrative is that Gamergate was a loosely organized mob of angry white male gamers bent upon harassing women with the intent of chasing them out of the gaming sphere. The modern narrative has retroactively added a new spin that Gamergate was also about promoting white supremacy, even though no such accusations existed 3 years ago. But again, the facts are antithetical to this oft-promoted narrative.
So he's basically denying there's any subculture of racism in video games. I love how these guys get so offended. It's like, because I'm not on the alt-right and I play video games, it can't be true. Everyone knows that gaming culture is very toxic. I've made videos about this. Gaming culture online on YouTube is very toxic, extremely right-leaning, always talking about anti-SJWs, cultural Marxism, the infiltration of video games by communists and stuff like that. It's very common. You can see why it's quite easy to steer people to more radical beliefs if they're into this gaming culture online. You also have games like World War II games, like Hearts of Iron, where people actually generally do love the Nazis and stuff. But in general, Western gaming culture is pretty fertile ground for more radical ideologies to flourish. It's just something that's true. Does not mean that everyone who plays video games is some sort of Nazi. It just means hardcore gamer culture and people in it sometimes can be more susceptible to that stuff. I made a whole video on that as well. But the Axeman said something similar about this when he was talking about Anita Sarkeesian. It's that gaming is extremely welcoming. Everyone can be a gamer and everyone is welcome.
Video games serve as a sort of joint language and culture that brings us together. Through our shared passion for great interactive experiences, we find common ground.
You have to go looking for it to find the problematic racism. As someone who grew up playing video games on Xbox Live, think of Xbox Live lobbies, think of Modern Warfare 2 Search and Destroy, Modern Warfare 1 Search and Destroy. And I've had people in the comments also say, as a black person or an Asian person, I've been met with so much racism. It was essentially an unfiltered place to say whatever you want back in the day. And if you were online for any amount of time, the amount of racial slurs, all this Nazi stuff you would find online was so common. It was basically like this melting pot of Western men all saying this stuff. And I compared it to football culture in the UK, where it was just a safe space to be as racist as possible. And anyone who's been online from 2007, say, to now, would have had some experience of that, whether it was directed at you or whether you just overheard people saying it in these chat rooms.
Wow, away from the spawn and still how the fuck you want. Whoopsie fucking do. Dude, you and 9 and 23. You talk shit like a loser. I thought you just won. You're talking shit like a little bitch. Hey, I'm better than more than half your fucking team. Look at where I'm at. I'm above you. Shut your mouth. You and 9 and 23. You like getting raped? Is that what you're talking about? Because I told you to suck my dick, but I got your fucking back right now. You can't open your mouth to suck it, motherfucker. You just chill the fuck out.
And yes, it's okay to be a gamer, but as someone who's very passionate about video games, you also have to admit the problems that comes with it. It doesn't mean the video games you're making make people this way. There are other problems of how video games make you feel about certain elements of history or stuff like that, but they don't make you into Nazis. It's just the culture online, which you can find anywhere. It's like 4chan or something. Don't have to get so offended and make a whole video about how it's okay to be a gamer. So now let's get into the more explicit politics that leave behind the video game. So he made a video called The Injustice of Social Justice. And he's basically talking about diversity in Hollywood and the wage gap.
The distribution of racial demographics in Hollywood movies. Social justice advocates will point to numbers like those represented in this chart and complain that clearly Hollywood favors casting white people to the detriment of other races. They proclaim that the system is broken and must now be fixed. But when we look at US racial demographics, and consider that Hollywood is in the business of providing entertainment to the entire country, we can see that there's actually a high correlation between inputs and outputs. Modifying the system to produce, say, twice as many Asian characters wouldn't reflect a more accurate representation. It would only serve to further a social engineering agenda. Or consider the much touted wage gap alleged to exist between women and men. Charts, like this one, used during the 2012 presidential campaign, showed that women were being paid only 77 cents for every dollar that a man earns for doing the same work. But it was based entirely on summed demographic outputs that deliberately ignored inputs into the system, such as education, experience, job position, and hours worked. When these inputs are taken into account, the wage gap narrows to being less than 3%. And that difference is likely due more so to assertiveness in individual salary negotiations than to anything systematic. It is also worthwhile to point out that it has been illegal since the Equal Pay Act of 1963 to discriminate wages based upon sex or race. So in the few cases in the US where this still may be happening, tools are already in place to remedy the situation.
So like you saw in that video, firstly with the diversity thing, he's saying that white men being dominant in Hollywood isn't actually that bad when you break it down by the demographics, and it's not actually that bad in terms of the audience for movies and stuff. But this guy obviously doesn't, assess the power dynamic. Even if you had, a film industry that was representative of the American population by the amount of people acting, let's say actors in general, what he still leaves out is that most top-tier actors, most famous actors are white men still. Doesn't matter if, you know, loads of the supporting roles or loads of the extra roles were all going to, you know, a proportional amount of minorities. Hollywood primarily is still white owned, primarily stars white men and women. Even to films that are marketed to different audiences, like the Chinese audience. Like, for example, remember that Great Wall film or something starring Matt Damon and like Pedro Pascal and stuff? But it was marketed at China. But this guy doesn't understand the power dynamics. So this goes into the wage gap thing. So he starts talking about the wage gap and how it doesn't exist, essentially. And the problem with it is that people don't really say the wage gap means, like, I work the same job as a woman and we're being paid different amounts, right? He's saying that doesn't exist because in JFK's day, he signed a law about equal pay. Now, the difference is that men have higher positions in jobs, meaning that men's income as a whole is way more than women's. He puts this down to women not being as assertive in salary negotiations. How does anyone believe this stuff? It's obvious that we have systemic sexism in our culture, in business culture, in corporate culture, even in government, where it's harder for women to reach the higher echelons of that stuff because they face systemic sexism. But in a guy's view, if you don't believe in systemic racism and sexism, the only reason women aren't paid as much in the workforce is because they're not as assertive in salary negotiations. Again, this guy is people's boss. You can be a woman working at WB Games, and this is the guy you have to answer to. The guy who believes that if you are paid less, if you cannot reach the high echelons of a company, anything like that, it's because you weren't assertive in your salary negotiations, where men primarily are more assertive, so they make more money based primarily on that. Ridiculous logic, but again, that's why I feel bad this guy's in a position of power, because we've all had crap bosses, we've all had awful bosses. Imagine if your boss also believed all this stuff this guy's saying, while being an extreme pro-capitalist who quotes Thomas Sowell all the time. So last one, he made a video about are thought crimes becoming real, and he basically just posts some arguments he's been having on Facebook. But he says there's no evidence Donald Trump is a racist.
So the next conversation I had was on Facebook with one of my left-leaning friends about the alleged motivations of President Donald Trump. I sometimes take issue with some of the mass media representations of Trump that seem to me to be driven more by a left-leaning political agenda and based more on their personal distaste for him as a person than upon his actual actions. But the gist of our discussion was that he, as someone on the left, was convinced that Donald Trump is a racist. I told him that, while there may be plenty to criticize Trump about, I didn't see that there is enough to arrive at the conclusion that he is being motivated in what he does by racism. I would love it if Trump was swept from office in 2020 and replaced by someone better suited for the position. I really don't like the guy's personality, and I think his narcissistic TV boss personality is embarrassing. I cringe when he speaks and fear for the diplomatic damage he's doing as a representative of the US. All that being said, I also think that the Trump is a racist or Trump is a Russian lapdog tropes that the left seems obsessed with are the mirror images of the birther conspiracies or Obama is an Islamist hallucinations that were on the right when he was president. These sorts of allegations purport to know the true heart or intentions of the president. They're very much like conspiracy theories that selectively pick and choose tidbits of data to sketch out some kind of case that is compelling only to those who already want to believe it. There are all kinds of valid things to criticize Trump about, but smearing him as a closet white supremacist seems desperate and childish.
Not only was there no evidence Trump was a racist by the end of 2017, Charlottesville, his presidential campaign, his history with the Central Park Five, that after they were proved innocent, he still said they should all get the death penalty. His dad was in the KKK. Donald Trump ran segregated apartments after civil rights was passed. Not only does he believe that, but he says it's the same as the right saying that Obama was a Muslim and the birtherism conspiracy theory. It's funny he mentioned birtherism, and in the same post, he says Donald Trump isn't racist. Donald Trump led the birther movement. So you're even contradicting yourself in your own point. So that is this guy. This is Troy Levitt. And let's get into my final point. Should this guy be fired for his views? Now, that is up to WB. That is up to the company. If they have some sort of code of ethics or code of conduct which sort of forbids views like this, you know, minimizing racism, saying systemic sexism doesn't exist, I'm sure these companies, especially WB and someone who's making Harry Potter, would say Harry Potter's for everyone. we stand with Black Lives Matter, we stand against sexism and stuff, but then this guy is high up in the studio. Now, my main problem with this guy does not come from a creative standpoint, although I don't think having these views really makes you a good creative, considering you're just promoting the status quo and rejecting, you know, everything, you know, we're criticizing the culture for at the moment, which we have facts to back us up and stuff. My main problem is this guy is people's boss. And, you know, I made my video back in December when I quit my job, talking about how awful my boss was. I didn't know her political views. I know she was extremely pro-capitalist. But if you're a woman or a minority working for this guy, how do you feel? How do you feel this guy rejects that systemic racism exists in America? How do you feel this guy rejects systemic sexism exists? How do you feel this guy not only believes these things, but goes on multiple videos ranting about this stuff? That's the problem here, I think. Even saying Donald Trump isn't racist. This guy is not going to be the most sensitive if you had a problem of racial discrimination in the workplace. So, say it wasn't him. Say someone else was racist to you at work or sexist to you. Go tell this guy, your boss. Go tell HR, and then they have a conversation with your boss, Troy. How do you think he's going to act? How do you think he's going to react to the news of, you know, the stuff here? If Donald Trump isn't a racist in this guy's opinion, then who is a racist? If in someone's opinion calling Donald Trump a racist is the same as calling Obama a Muslim, apparently they're both nonsensical, then again, how do you think this guy's going to deal with stuff at work? I sympathise with the people working at WB Games and Avalanche and having to deal with this guy. Who knows what he's like in person, but when you have such radical political views like this, and such right-wing political views like this, and you're responsible for people's livelihoods, and I don't feel these guys who work at the studio would be probably treated that well. Anyway, that is it for the video. Let me know what you guys think in the description. Like the video and comment what you guys think. If you want to follow me on social media, at The Cavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. Come join our community at my subreddit and my Discord in the description. Support me on Patreon if you're feeling generous. And look at what we can achieve if we keep supporting the channel. Imagine how many I could have, and you want that 100k live stream where I just sit and eat all of these, no matter how stale they are. So if you made it this far, thank you for watching.